Hi, I'm Steph, and this is my socio-me-ology project. For this assignment, I found it kind of difficult to start by choosing sociological concepts and creating something around them. So instead, I decided to draw myself as how I perceive kind of all of the aspects of me that influence and affect who I am as a person. So when I was doing this drawing, I was really thinking about my education and the culture that surrounds me, and how both of these things are concepts that are almost constantly changing in some way for me as I continue to learn and grow based on my lived experiences and on the perceptions of the world around me. In turn, I would say that both of these things have led me to obtain certain religious beliefs and to question who I am. And these are things that I just couldn't help but think about when I was working on this drawing. So, to explain a little bit, the faces within the head are meant to represent the different aspects of myself that make up who I am as a whole, while the colors of them are to show that even these individual aspects can't be fully or neatly broken down. They're usually multifaceted, confusing, and kind of at odds with each other as I navigate trying to figure them out. For the lines that are all around the head, I kind of wanted to try and show them both as the entrance and exit of ideas and influences that shape the different aspects of me and kind of just ultimately myself as a person. I really wanted to explore myself using my sociological imagination in this assignment because, obviously that was the goal. And so I really decided to focus on my understanding of myself first as it relates to my education and then as it relates to the culture that I live in. To start off, I think it's important to acknowledge that I'm very privileged to have been born in a country where education isn't just a norm that's expected by our society at large, but also one that's available and required for all classes of people within Canada. I think it's also important to point out that I've been very lucky to have never grown up in any sort of poverty, which obviously isn't the case for a lot of people, and I've been very lucky. As a woman, I think I have some sort of an ascribed status that I've had to face and deal with when it comes to education. An example I can think of is being told by a high school guidance counselor that maybe I'd be more suited for secretarial work when I mentioned that I wanted to become a lawyer in the future. While these experiences were few for me, knowing that even another woman was giving me advice based on my gender was upsetting and was honestly pretty eye-opening as I finished up high school. I'd also say that there was some level of gatekeeping for me when it came to certain educational topics or classes that I was in. A really clear one I can think of is being in an AP political science class in grade 12, and it was just myself and a couple of other girls, and every single time we had debates or whatever in the class, a lot of the time we were just spoken over or ignored, and it was very frustrating to go through. So while my education has opened my eyes to the world around me and arguably, I think, made me a better, more open-minded person, they've also forced me to understand and acknowledge the importance of stuff like feminism and advocating for minority groups. Because within the educational sphere, if those are things I myself have experienced when I think I'm a very lucky person who does not face very many biases, within the educational sphere, I just think there's still a lot of work to be done to make schools a true place of equality. Moving on to the cultural aspect, I think that Canadian culture can be hard to put a label on, since we're so multicultural that getting into the details of our non-material culture can really vary heavily place to place. I'd argue that there's an overarching set of values and norms, such as the idea that all of us are polite and that we value universal healthcare and education. But beyond these kind of more broad concepts, it can be difficult to think of specifics. There's also definitely cultural universals that can be found, such as the idea that murder is important and wrong, But I don't think that these are overly relevant to dwell on because at this point, I argue you can probably find that anywhere in the world. While I've lived in Canada my whole life, I did grow up in Alberta and moved here when I was 18 for university. And while the two provinces are next door to each other, I've noticed over my 4 years here that they have very different cultural aspects from one another, as do the more urban areas compared to the more rural ones. Right off the bat, one of the biggest ones that I've noticed is that BC tends to be much more conscious of and concerned with the idea of their ecological footprint than is the case in Alberta, which does make sense to me considering Alberta relies heavily on oil, but I guess it's something that took me a while to realize when I moved here because, I don't know, living somewhere like Alberta, it is very true that a big number of the people around me had family who relied directly on the oil industry to keep themselves going. And so it's definitely a more complicated issue than just black or white. And I feel like now I can finally see both sides. And I hope that this can be reconciled a bit better because I know that across Canada, people have strong opinions on the oil industry. I've also noticed that particularly in Vancouver and kind of the metropolitan Vancouver area, there's way more ethnic diversity and representation than I personally really saw in Alberta, which is awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to see that, I guess. So both by changing where I live and as a result of the culture in which I find myself, as well as continuing with my education, my opinions and understanding of the world around me and myself as a person are constantly changing. If I look at it from a sociological perspective, I think I've really been able to better identify the smaller details that have contributed to these changes, such as being better educated on other cultures, properly informed on concepts such as pink ghettos that I'd never heard of before, and general issues such as racism that we still face even though we're a developed country, and realizing that things like gender and sexuality are both incredibly capable of existing on a spectrum. As I get older, I'm much more comfortable with the idea that I'll always be learning and changing, because I think that being open to everything you can is what keeps us empathetic and on the path to improvement. Thank you for listening.